she blind dates with a poor man, not knowing he was a hidden millionaire CEO in disguise. Hello everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It is quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now, let us return to today's story. The rain poured endlessly over the small downtown coffee shop, streaking the foggy windows and painting silver lines against the streetlights outside. Inside, the smell of roasted beans filled the air as tired commuters shook the rain from their coats. Emily sat by the window, nervously twisting the strap of her worn leather purse. Her friend had begged her to go on this blind date, promising it was time to open her heart again. But now, waiting alone at a tiny table for two, she was not so sure. She glanced at the door every few seconds, watching people rush in from the storm. Her reflection on the glass reminded her of who she was, a small-town girl trying to survive in the big city, working double shifts at a local cafe to pay rent that was always overdue. Her second-hand coat was still damp, her hair clinging to her face in thin strands. Still, she had promised herself she would try. The bell above the door jingled. A man stepped in, shaking out his umbrella. His clothes were plain, an old denim jacket, dark jeans, and shoes that had clearly seen better days. He looked around, uncertain, and then his eyes met hers. Emily's heart skipped. Maybe this was him. "Hi," she said, standing with an awkward smile. "You must be Mark, right? I am Emily." The man blinked, surprised, but then smiled softly. "Yeah," he said after a pause. "Mark." "Ugh." He took the seat across from her, brushing the rain from his sleeve. The waitress came by, and Emily ordered 2 coffees, placing a $10 bill on the counter when the man patted his empty pockets. "Do not worry about it," she said gently. "You can get the next one." Outside, thunder rumbled, but inside, the hum of quiet conversations filled the silence between them. She talked about her job at the bakery, about how hard it was to make ends meet, but how she still loved seeing people smile over something sweet. He listened, nodding, his gaze steady, almost studying her like she was something rare. When she asked what he did for work, he hesitated before saying, "I am between things right now." Emily nodded with an empathetic smile. "That makes 2 of us trying to figure life out." For the first time that evening, he laughed, low and genuine. The sound caught her off guard. It was the kind of laugh that came from someone who had not used it in a while. Outside, the rain eased to a soft drizzle. Inside, under the golden light of the cafe, 2 strangers shared warmth that neither expected. What Emily did not know was that the man sitting before her was no struggling drifter. He was Ethan Carter, a hidden millionaire CEO living a double life, searching for one thing money could never buy, someone who would see him for who he truly was. The next morning, sunlight spilled through the cracked blinds of Ethan's penthouse apartment, revealing a space that was pristine, expensive, and lifeless. He sat at the edge of his bed, still thinking about the girl from the coffee shop. Emily. The way she had smiled through exhaustion. The way she had spoken about kindness, as if it was the only currency that truly mattered. For the first time in a long while, Ethan felt something real stir inside him. He removed the denim jacket he had worn the night before. It was cheap, rough around the edges. But it was the only layer between his real life and the one he pretended to have. On the dresser sat his phone, lighting up with notifications. A dozen emails. 3 board meeting reminders. 2 missed calls from his assistant. He exhaled deeply, ran a hand through his hair, and picked up the device. "Good morning, sir." His assistant's voice crackled through the speaker. "You missed your call with the Singapore investors. Should I reschedule?" "Do it," Ethan said quietly. "And about the gala tonight? Your father's foundation expects you to attend." Ethan looked at his reflection in the mirror, expensive haircut, flawless watch, the uniform of a man people bowed to. Yet the person in the mirror felt like a stranger. "Tell them I am unavailable," he replied, and hung up. He turned off his phone completely and stood by the window, gazing down at the city below. For years, he had built his empire on logic and control, but lately, none of it made sense. People smiled at him for profit, not for warmth. Even conversations were transactions. Emily had been different. She had looked at him like he was human, not a headline. Down in Midtown, Emily rushed through her morning shift at the cafe. The bell on the door chimed endlessly as customers ordered caramel lattes and breakfast sandwiches. Her manager barked instructions while she balanced trays and wiped counters. But every now and then, her thoughts drifted back to the quiet man with tired eyes from the night before. "Are you even listening, Emily?" her coworker asked. "Sorry," she said, forcing a smile. "Just tired." At noon, during her short break, she sat by the window again, sipping coffee she could barely afford. Outside, the city buzzed with motion taxis honking, people shouting, lives rushing past. She wondered what Mark was doing, whether he had found a job, whether he was warm and dry somewhere. The doorbell jingled again, and when she looked up, her heart skipped. It was him. Same denim jacket, same unassuming smile. He walked toward her with that gentle kind of confidence that did not need to announce itself. "You again," she said with surprise. "I was in the neighborhood," he answered, his tone easy, casual. "Thought I'd grab another coffee, but this time, I will pay." She laughed softly. "Deal." As she made his order, the rain outside began again, light, steady, tapping against the windows. Ethan watched her move, graceful in the chaos, handling each customer with patience. She handed him his cup with a smile that warmed him more than the drink ever could. He took a sip, grimaced slightly, and said, "Still too sweet." "Ah, woo," she grinned. "Then you are officially not from around here. City people live on sugar and caffeine." He chuckled, shaking his head. "Maybe I am just trying to keep up." They sat at a corner table when her shift ended. Emily talked about her dream to open a small bakery someday. A place where people who could not afford much could still walk in and feel seen. Ethan listened intently, every word sinking deeper than she realized. "My mom used to bake when we had nothing," Emily said, her voice softening. She said, "The smell of bread reminds people they are not alone. I want that kind of place again." Ethan's jaw tightened as a flash of memory crossed his mind, his own mother's small kitchen, her flour-stained hands, her laughter before everything changed. He had forgotten that sound until now. "Do you still have family?" he asked. "Just me," she said, "and a few good friends. That is enough." She noticed his eyes darken slightly, the way people's eyes did when they carried weight they never spoke of. "What about you?" she asked gently. He hesitated, then smiled faintly. "It is complicated." Before she could ask more, a group of customers entered, breaking the quiet between them. He stood, sliding a folded $10 bill onto the table. "For the coffee last night," he said. She picked it up, looking at the worn edges. "You did not have to." "Oh, I know," he said, meeting her gaze. "But sometimes paying back kindness is not enough. You have to understand it." Emily blinked, unsure how to respond. But before she could speak, he was already heading toward the door. That evening, Ethan sat alone in his office, lights dim, city glowing beneath him. On the desk lay the day's reports, stocks, mergers, profit projections, all meaningless. He thought about Emily's smile, her hope, her belief that kindness could still survive in a city built on ambition. He picked up his phone and opened the charity project folder his father had once ignored. A name came to mind. Open Hands Foundation. He typed it slowly, hearing her voice echo in his memory. "If I had money, I would help people who lost everything." Ethan leaned back in his chair, the faintest smile forming. Maybe this was his way back to something real. Across town, as Emily locked the cafe doors, she stepped into the misty rain. The city lights reflected in puddles along the sidewalk. She pulled her coat tighter, unaware that the man she had shared 2 cups of coffee with was watching her from a black sedan across the street. Inside that car, Ethan whispered to himself, "Every kindness counts." Oh, and as the windshield wipers swept away the rain, his reflection vanished, leaving only the quiet determination of a man who had just begun to remember what it meant to feel. The next few days passed in a quiet rhythm that felt strangely comforting to Emily. Each morning, she opened the cafe, wiped down the counters, and greeted customers with her usual warmth. Yet every time the bell above the door rang, she found herself glancing up, hoping to see that familiar denim jacket again. Sometimes he came, sometimes he did not, but when he did, the air around her always seemed lighter. The man she knew as Mark always sat in the same corner seat by the window, the one where the sunlight hit the edge of the table. He never stayed long, yet somehow, each short visit left behind a calm she could not explain. He listened more than he spoke, and when he smiled, it was the kind of smile that came from someone who understood how fragile hope could be. That Thursday afternoon, the cafe was busier than usual. Emily was balancing 2 trays when her coworker, Ruth, whispered as she passed by. "Your friend is here again, the quiet one." Emily turned, trying not to appear too eager, and smiled when she saw him. He waved once and waited patiently, as if he had all the time in the world. When her shift finally ended, she untied her apron and walked over to him. "You know," she said playfully, "most customers order coffee, drink it, and leave. You come here like it is some kind of ritual." He tilted his head, amused. "Maybe it is. Maybe this place reminds me of something I forgot." "Like what?" He hesitated, then said softly, "Peace." Her laughter faded at the honesty in his tone. For a brief second, their eyes met, and the noise of the cafe disappeared. They talked for nearly an hour that day. Emily told him about her childhood in the small town of Willow Creek, about the way her mother used to play old jazz records while baking bread, filling the whole house with warmth. She shared how her mother had passed away 3 years ago and how she had promised to keep going no matter how hard it got. Ethan listened quietly, his chest tightening with a feeling he had not allowed himself to feel in years. Empathy. She spoke without bitterness, without envy. Just simple acceptance. That kind of strength humbled him. When she finished, she laughed softly. "Sorry. That was a lot. I do not usually tell strangers my life story." "You did not," he said. "You told someone who needed to hear it." She blinked, surprised by the weight in his words. "And what about you? What is your story, Mark?" He leaned back, eyes drifting to the window. Outside, the rain had begun again, soft and steady. "I grew up in a world that measured worth by numbers. My father believed compassion made men weak. I spent most of my life trying to prove him wrong, but somehow I became exactly what he was." Emily looked at him with quiet understanding. "Maybe you are still proving him wrong. You just have to remember why you started." Ethan smiled faintly. "Maybe meeting you is my reminder." Before she could respond, her manager called her name from behind the counter. "Emily, we need to restock the supplies." She stood reluctantly. "Duty calls." "Oh, go," he said gently. "I will see you tomorrow." When she turned to look back, he was still there, finishing his coffee, lost in thought. Later that evening, Emily returned to her small apartment, her hair damp from the drizzle. Ruth was sitting at the kitchen table, typing on her old laptop. "You have been smiling a lot lately," Ruth said without looking up. "Does this have anything to do with the mysterious Mark who drinks too much coffee?" Emily blushed. "He is just kind. You do not meet many people like that anymore." Ruth snorted. "Kind is good, broke is not. Be careful, Em. You do not really know him." Emily sighed. "You sound like my mom." "I am serious," Ruth said, closing the laptop. "You are the nicest person I know, but not everyone deserves that kind of trust." "I know," Emily replied softly, "but I think he does." Across the city, Ethan sat in his office, the lights dimmed to gold. The skyline stretched endlessly before him, glittering and cold. His assistant, Nara, entered quietly with a folder. "Sir, the investors are asking about the next quarter's report," she said. "Put it on my desk," Ethan replied, not looking up. Nara hesitated. "You have been leaving the office early lately. Is everything all right?" Ethan glanced at her, then smiled faintly. "Everything is clearer than it has been in years." "Oh?" When she left, he opened the folder, but found himself staring instead at a small paper receipt tucked in his pocket, the one from the cafe where Emily worked. Her name was written on it in blue ink from the thank you note she had signed. He traced the letters with his thumb. For the first time, Ethan wondered what it would feel like to live without the weight of his name, without the luxury, the boardrooms, the bodyguards, just Ethan. Just a man drinking coffee across from a woman who believed in kindness. The next morning, Emily found a small envelope taped to the cafe door when she arrived to open. Inside was a note written in careful handwriting. "Thank you for the warmth. You reminded me what it means to be human." There was no signature, only a single $10 bill folded neatly inside. She stared at it for a long time. Her heart caught somewhere between curiosity and something she could not yet name. That day, she worked with a quiet smile on her face. Customers came and went, but in her heart, a soft question echoed. Who was he, really? And across the city, Ethan Carter, billionaire CEO of Carter Holdings, looked out his window at the morning sun breaking through the clouds and whispered to himself, "She will know me one day, but for the right reasons." It was no longer just an experiment. It was something that felt dangerously close to hope. The following week arrived with colder mornings and a sky heavy with rain. Emily's alarm buzzed before sunrise, and she pulled herself from bed, wrapping a worn scarf around her neck. The city was still half asleep when she stepped outside, her boots splashing through puddles on the way to the cafe. Life moved in cycles for her work, bills, exhaustion, but lately, something had shifted. She had found herself looking forward to each day a little more, all because of one quiet stranger who seemed to see her differently from everyone else. When she entered the cafe, the air was thick with the familiar smell of roasted beans and vanilla syrup. She set her bag down, tied her apron, and began wiping the counters. Ruth arrived a few minutes later, yawning, her hair tucked under a knit hat. "Morning," Ruth said, glancing at Emily with a knowing smile. "Do you think he is coming today?" Emily rolled her eyes. "You mean Mark? I do not know. He never says when he will come." Ruth smirked. "He always comes when it rains. Maybe he likes the sound of storms, or maybe he likes the girl who works here when it rains." Emily's cheeks warmed, but she said nothing. She focused on arranging pastries in the glass case, trying to ignore the flutter in her chest. By mid-morning, the bell above the door jingled, and there he was, denim jacket, quiet smile, eyes that carried a calm no storm could shake. He nodded once in greeting, the kind of gesture that felt like a conversation all on its own. "Good morning," she said as he approached the counter. "Good morning," he replied. "One black coffee, please." She raised an eyebrow. "No sugar this time?" He smiled faintly, trying to adjust to city life. She laughed as she handed him the cup. "You are improving." The cafe was busy, so she could not linger long, but when her break came, she found him sitting in his usual seat by the window. He had a notebook open, pages filled with neat handwriting. She sat down across from him, curiosity shining in her eyes. "What are you writing?" she asked. "Just thoughts," he said, closing the notebook gently. "Things I want to remember." "Like what?" He hesitated. "Like the way people smile when they do not have to." "Oh." Her expression softened. "That is a nice thing to remember." He looked at her for a moment, then said quietly, "You give people that kind of smile." The words caught her off guard. For a second, she forgot how to breathe. She looked down at her coffee, her fingers tracing the rim of the cup. "You say things like that too easily," she murmured. "Not easily," he said. "Only when they are true." Outside, the rain turned heavier, streaking down the window like silver threads. The sound filled the small space between them. It was not romantic in the grand sense, no music, no grand gestures, but something in the stillness made her feel safe. After her shift ended, he waited by the door, with an umbrella. "You should not walk home in this," he said. She hesitated. "You do not have to." "I know," he said again, the same way he had said it before, softly, sincerely. "But I want to." They shared the umbrella as they walked through the drizzle. The city lights reflected off wet pavement, casting gold and blue shadows that shimmered with every passing car. For a while, they walked in silence, listening to the rhythm of the rain. When they reached her building, Emily turned to him. "You are full of surprises, you know that?" He smiled faintly. "I am just full of questions, mostly about life." "Like what kind of questions?" He looked at the worn steps leading to her apartment door. "What happens when someone who has everything realizes he has nothing that matters?" She frowned, sensing there was more behind his words. "Then maybe he should start over." Ethan nodded slightly. Maybe he should. For a long moment, neither of them moved. The rain slowed to a mist. She could see his breath in the cool air, and she noticed that despite the chill, he did not look cold. He looked thoughtful, almost hopeful. "Thank you for walking me home," she said finally. He gave a small nod. "Good night, Emily." When he left, She stood at her doorway, watching until he disappeared around the corner. Something about him felt different tonight, like he was carrying the weight of a secret he could not yet share. Later that evening, Ethan returned to his penthouse. The lights from the skyline poured through the tall windows, reflecting against the glass like distant stars. He loosened his tie and set his phone on the desk. It vibrated almost instantly. His assistant's voice came through the speaker. "Sir, your father's foundation dinner is in 2 hours. Everyone will expect you to speak." "I will not attend," he said quietly. "But sir, this event is in your name." He ended the call. The silence that followed was heavy but freeing. He looked down at his hands, still damp from the rain, and realized they smelled faintly of coffee and sugar. For a long while, he simply stood there, staring at the city below. He had spent years hiding behind glass walls and contracts, but for the first time, he felt something real pressing through the noise. Kindness. Something he could not buy or control. He walked to the mirror, staring at the reflection of the man everyone else called Mr. Carter. Tonight, the reflection looked tired, unsure, but human. And in that moment, he whispered to himself, "Maybe I am allowed to start over too." Across town, Emily stood by her small window, watching the same city lights flicker in the distance. She smiled softly, unaware that her kindness was already changing the life of a man who had forgotten what it meant to feel alive. The morning after the rain carried a soft gray light that made the city look calmer than usual. The streets glistened with reflections of passing cars, and somewhere inside that gentle hum of routine, Emily felt lighter. She hummed to herself while arranging pastries behind the glass counter, unaware that the quiet rhythm of her days was about to shift. At 8:30, the bell above the cafe door chimed, and Ethan walked in wearing that same denim jacket. His hair was slightly messy, and his eyes looked tired, but the warmth in his smile was the same. Emily's heart lifted before she could stop herself. "You are early today," she said. He nodded. "Could not sleep. Thought a good cup of coffee might help." "Oh." She poured his usual black coffee and slid it across the counter. "Rough night?" He took a slow sip before answering. "Just one of those nights when your mind does not quiet down. Do you ever get those?" "All the time," she said, "mostly about rent and bills, sometimes about life." Ethan smiled faintly. "You make it sound simple. But that is a heavy list." "It feels lighter when you talk about it," she replied. For a few moments, neither of them spoke. The cafe was half full, but the world around them seemed to fade to a soft murmur. It was then that Emily noticed the small cut on his knuckle. "You hurt yourself?" she asked. He looked down, surprised, as if he had forgotten. "Just a scratch. I tried to fix a loose chair leg at home. Turns out, I am terrible at repairs." "You? The calm and collected Mark?" She teased him lightly. "I do not believe it." He laughed. "Believe it. I am many things, but handy is not one of them." Her laughter joined his, and for a second, something like comfort settled between them, easy, unforced, real. By lunchtime, her shift was almost over, and he was still there, sitting by the window, writing in his notebook again. She brought him a croissant on a small plate. "On the house," she said. "Because you look like someone who forgets to eat." He smiled but did not touch it immediately. "You are too kind, Emily." "Kindness does not cost much," she said. "It just multiplies if you give it away." Her words lingered long after she walked away to help another customer. Ethan stared at the croissant, at her fading reflection in the window, and something inside him softened further. She did not know it, but those small words were beginning to break the walls he had spent years building. That evening, when he returned to his penthouse, his assistant Nara was waiting with a file in hand. "Sir, the board has noticed your absences," she said gently. "They are starting to ask questions." Ethan set down his briefcase and loosened his tie. "Let them ask. Is everything all right?" He paused for a moment. "It might finally be." Nara looked at him curiously but said nothing more. When she left, he sat by the window again, watching the city glow beneath the fading sky. He thought about Emily's laugh, the way she listened when no one else did. In a world where people chased profit, she valued people. He realized how rare that was, and how much he missed that kind of simplicity. The next day, he returned to the cafe once more. It was raining again, soft and steady, the kind of rain that blurred the edges of everything. Emily was helping an older woman who had dropped her shopping bag. Without hesitation, she crouched to help gather the spilled apples, smiling the whole time. When she straightened up, Ethan was watching her. "You always do that," he said. "Do what?" "Help people, like it is second nature." She shrugged lightly. "If I can make someone's day a little easier, why not?" He smiled. "You are something rare, Emily." Her eyes met his. "You say that like you are not used to people being kind." "I am not," he admitted. There was no pity in her gaze, only quiet understanding. She reached across the counter and brushed a faint drop of rain from his sleeve. "Then maybe you just need to look harder. Kindness is everywhere if you let it in." The words struck deeper than she knew. That evening, Ethan sat in his office staring at the framed photos of his late parents. His father's expression in the picture was stern, commanding, the face of a man who had built an empire by measuring people in numbers and worth. For years, Ethan had done the same without realizing it. He stood and walked toward the shelves filled with awards and certificates. They meant nothing now. All the success in the world felt hollow compared to the warmth of a smile from someone who expected nothing in return. He picked up his phone and scrolled to an old folder labeled Community Programs. It had been ignored for years. Inside were proposals for small business funding, food drives, and charity events. Most had been denied. He opened one titled Open Hands, a project once rejected for low profitability. The words Emily had said echoed in his mind. Kindness just multiplies if you give it away. Ethan clicked Approve. Across the city, Emily closed the cafe for the night, unaware of the quiet ripple her kindness had set in motion. She walked home beneath the same rain, her umbrella barely keeping up. At one corner, she stopped to hand her leftover pastries to a man sitting under the awning of an old bookstore. "Stay warm," she said softly. He thanked her, eyes wide with surprise. She smiled, unaware that someone from across the street was watching the same man whose life she was unknowingly changing. Ethan stood in the shadows near his parked car, hands in his pockets, the rain tracing lines down his face. For once, he did not feel like a CEO. He felt like a man simply grateful to witness something good. As she disappeared down the street, he whispered to himself, "Every kindness counts." And this time, he truly believed it. The week after, the rain felt brighter, as if the whole city had taken a deep breath. The sun broke through the clouds more often, and the cold wind softened into something almost gentle. Emily noticed the change each morning as she walked to work. The air smelled cleaner. The sidewalks shimmered faintly with leftover puddles. She still worked long hours, but her steps felt lighter now, guided by a quiet joy that came from seeing a familiar face across the cafe counter. Ethan continued to visit the cafe almost every day. Sometimes he came early in the morning, when only a few customers were around. Other times, he stopped by near closing, when the shop was quiet and golden light spread across the floor. The routine had become something sacred between them, a rhythm that did not need to be spoken. On a Friday afternoon, Emily wiped the counter as he walked in. The bell chimed softly, and her heart lifted. "I thought you would not come today," she said. "I almost did not," he admitted, "but I missed my favorite coffee shop." She smiled. "You mean your favorite waitress?" He chuckled. "That too." As she made his coffee, he asked, "Do you ever take a break from this place?" She shook her head. "Not really. Between work here and trying to help my friend with her night classes, there is not much time left." "Then let me buy you dinner," he said suddenly. "Not as anything formal, just two people who could use a good meal. All free." Emily hesitated, startled by his tone. It was gentle, sincere, without the usual confidence she saw in other men. "You do not seem like someone who has trouble finding company," she said. He smiled faintly. "Sometimes the people surrounded by the most noise are the loneliest." She studied his face, trying to read what he meant, then nodded slowly. "All right. One dinner. But only if I pay for dessert." "Deal," he said, his smile deepening. That evening, they met at a small family-owned restaurant tucked between two brick buildings. The place was cozy and warm, filled with the aroma of baked bread and garlic. Emily wore a simple blue dress and her hair loosely tied back. Ethan was dressed neatly, but not flashy, blending into the quiet crowd. "This is my favorite place in the city," Emily said as they sat by the window. "The owner used to give me free soup when I first moved here. I was struggling a lot back then." Ethan looked around, noticing how every table seemed to have laughter, stories, and connection. "It feels real," he said. "Not like the places where people pretend to enjoy themselves just to be seen." She nodded. "Exactly. That is why I love it here." As they ate, the conversation drifted easily between light jokes and thoughtful silences. She talked about her dream bakery again, how she wanted to name it Sunrise Bread because every loaf would mean a fresh start for someone. Ethan listened, absorbing every detail, feeling something inside him steady for the first time in years. When she excused herself to wash her hands, his phone buzzed in his pocket. He sighed and answered quietly. It was Nara, his assistant. "Sir, the charity approval you pushed through open hands has drawn attention. The board wants to know why you are redirecting funds." "Tell them it is my personal decision," Ethan said firmly. "Sir, if they learn this is not a corporate initiative." "I said it is personal." He hung up before she could argue further. For a moment, he stared at the screen, the glow of it reflecting off the table. Then he turned it off completely and slipped it back into his jacket. When Emily returned, she noticed the tension in his eyes. "Bad news?" He smiled faintly. "Nothing that a slice of pie cannot fix." She grinned. "Good, because I am paying for dessert, remember?" The waitress brought 2 slices of warm apple pie with vanilla ice cream. Emily took the first bite and sighed happily. "This tastes like home," she said. Ethan laughed softly. "Then it is worth every calorie." They lingered at the table long after their plates were empty, talking about everything and nothing, the kind of conversation that feels effortless but leaves a mark. When they stepped outside, the air had turned crisp again. The street lamps glowed against the cobblestones, and a light breeze carried the faint scent of rain. Ethan walked her to the corner where the buses stopped. "Thank you," she said as they waited, "for dinner and for not making it weird." He smiled. "You make things easy, Emily." She looked at him then, really looked at him. The city noise faded, leaving only the quiet hum of the street. "You know, sometimes I think you are hiding something," she said half-jokingly. "But then I realize maybe you are just complicated." "Maybe both," he said with a hint of truth in his voice. The bus pulled up, its headlights washing them in white light. She hesitated before stepping on. "See you tomorrow?" "Would not miss it," he said. As the bus pulled away, Ethan stood there, hands in his pockets, watching until it turned the corner. The night wind brushed his face, carrying her laughter in his memory. Later, back in his penthouse, he opened his laptop and saw the headlines from his company's financial page. His name was everywhere again, tied to new investments and numbers that no longer excited him. He closed the screen and walked to the window. Somewhere across the city, a woman who worked 2 jobs and believed in kindness had unknowingly changed everything he thought he knew about value. He whispered to himself, "If I ever forget this, I do not deserve her kindness." The city lights shimmered below, reflecting in his eyes like promises waiting to be kept. The weekend brought a quiet calm to the city, but for Emily, it carried an uneasy feeling she could not explain. The morning sun shone through the cafe windows, lighting the steam that rose from fresh coffee pots. She hummed softly while wiping down the counter, but her mind drifted back to dinner with Mark 2 nights earlier. Something about him had changed after that phone call at the restaurant. His smile was still warm, but there had been a flicker of sadness behind his eyes. Ruth arrived a few minutes later, her curly hair tucked under a cap. "You are early," she said, pouring herself a cup of coffee. "I could not sleep," Emily admitted. "My head will not stop thinking." "About who?" Ruth asked with a grin. "Let me guess. Mr. Denim Jacket?" Emily laughed softly. "You make it sound like a bad thing." Ruth sipped her drink and raised an eyebrow. "It is not bad, but something about him feels, I do not know, too quiet. Like he is carrying a secret." Emily hesitated. "He said his life was complicated. Maybe that is what he meant." Ruth leaned on the counter. "Complicated can mean a lot of things, Em. Just be careful. All right?" Emily nodded, though her heart resisted the warning. Deep down, she believed in Mark. He had never said anything to make her doubt him. Still, a whisper of curiosity began to form a need to know who he truly was. Later that afternoon, the cafe filled with the usual weekend crowd. The door opened, and there he was, his jacket damp from light rain. He smiled when he saw her, and just like that, the unease faded. "You are working too hard again," he said, glancing at the trays she carried. "And you are showing up just in time to remind me," she replied. They shared a laugh, the easy kind that only came when words were unnecessary. But Ruth's voice broke the moment. "Emily, can I talk to you for a second?" Emily followed her to the back corner of the cafe. Ruth lowered her voice. "Do you know that guy's last name?" Emily blinked. "Why?" "I just asked one of the delivery guys. He said he saw him stepping out of a black luxury car last week around the corner. It looked expensive, like the kind only rich people drive." Emily frowned. "Maybe he was just catching a ride. That does not mean anything." "Maybe," Ruth said slowly. "But it does not add up, Em. He dresses like someone who is struggling, but he talks like someone who has seen the world. People like that do not just hang around coffee shops every day." Emily felt her stomach tighten. "You are overthinking. He is kind. He listens. That is all that matters." Ruth sighed. "I hope you are right." When Emily returned to the front, she noticed Mark Ethan watching her with quiet concern. "Everything all right?" he asked. She forced a smile. "Yes, just work talk." "Oh." He nodded, though he seemed to sense something was off. After a moment, he said, "Would you like to take a walk after your shift?" She hesitated but then agreed. "Sure." The air outside was crisp when they stepped out that evening. They walked down the narrow street lined with lampposts that glowed like candles in the mist. For a long while, they said nothing. Finally, Emily spoke. "You know, I never asked what you do for work." Ethan looked ahead, his expression unreadable. "I do a little bit of everything." "That is not an answer," she said, half teasing, half curious. He smiled faintly. "It is the only one I can give, right now." Her heart sank slightly. "You do not trust me." He stopped walking and turned toward her. "I do, more than I should, but there are parts of my life that are not simple. If I tell you everything now, you might see me differently." She studied his face, her voice soft. "Then I would rather see the truth than a version you think I can handle." The honesty in her tone pierced him. For a moment, he wanted to tell her everything, that he was Ethan Carter, the CEO of one of the city's biggest companies, the man people bowed to and feared. But the thought of losing the way she looked at him, the warmth without expectations, stopped him. "Soon," he said quietly. "I promise." She held his gaze for a moment longer, then nodded. "I will wait." "Oh?" They continued walking until they reached the park. The fountain in the center shimmered under the lights, and the faint sound of music from a nearby street performer drifted through the air. Ethan reached into his pocket and pulled out a folded piece of paper. "I wanted to give you this," he said. Emily unfolded it. It was a flyer for a new community program, Open Hands Foundation. It mentioned job opportunities, free meals for struggling families, and workshops for small business owners. "This sounds wonderful," she said, smiling. "Who started it?" Ethan hesitated. "Someone who believes kindness should not stay just a word." Her smile widened. "Then that someone has a good heart." He looked at her and said softly, "He learned that from someone else." She tucked the flyer into her bag, not knowing it was his creation. As they parted that evening, Emily's heart felt full, but Ruth's warning still echoed in her mind. She wanted to believe Mark was exactly who he seemed, yet something inside whispered that her world was about to change. Across town, in the high-rise tower that bore his last name, Ethan stepped into his office late that night. His assistant waited with a concerned look. "Sir, the press has found out about the Open Hands Foundation. They are asking if it is connected to Carter Holdings." Ethan sighed. "Let them wonder. People will start digging, sir." "Oh." He looked out at the glowing city below. "Let them dig. I have nothing to hide except the one thing that finally matters." As he stood there, the storm clouds began to gather again over the skyline. Somewhere in the city, a woman he cared for was beginning to question who he really was. And he knew that when the truth surfaced, kindness alone might not be enough to keep her heart. The night after their walk, the sky opened again, and rain poured over the city in a steady rhythm. It was the kind of rain that softened everything, the kind that blurred streetlights and muffled car horns. Inside her apartment, Emily sat by the window, her hands wrapped around a mug of tea that had long gone cold. The flyer for the Open Hands Foundation lay on the table beside her. She had read it several times, moved by its message helping people rebuild their lives with dignity. It reminded her of everything she wanted her own life to stand for. Still, Ruth's words from earlier that week echoed in her mind. "You do not really know him, Emily." She wanted to believe that she did. Mark, no. Ethan had never been anything but kind. But there were questions that kept circling back, ones he never fully answered. Who was he, really? Why did he look so sad when people talked about money or power? The following morning, the rain had stopped, leaving behind the soft scent of wet earth. The cafe was quiet when she arrived. The owner had gone to visit family out of town, leaving Emily and Ruth in charge for the weekend. The bell above the door jingled not long after they opened, and just like she expected, he walked in denim jacket, notebook, and that calm smile that made the world slow down for a second. "You are here early," she said. "I could say the same to you," he replied. "But I wanted to see you before the day gets busy." She poured him his usual coffee, then asked, "Have you heard about the Open Hands Foundation? I cannot stop thinking about it." He looked at her, caught off guard for a moment. "You liked it?" "Liked it?" she said with a soft laugh. "I loved it. Whoever started that understands what people really need: respect, not pity. I think I might apply for one of the positions they listed." Ethan's chest tightened. The idea of her working for the very foundation he had created filled him with a strange mix of pride and guilt. Pride, because she was drawn to something that had been born from her own kindness. Guilt, because he had not told her the truth. "That sounds perfect for you," he said finally. "They would be lucky to have you." Ruth passed by, balancing a tray of mugs, and gave Ethan a sharp glance before whispering to Emily, "Be careful, okay?" Emily frowned. "Ruth, please." But Ruth only shrugged and went back to work. The hours passed quickly, and when the cafe emptied in the late afternoon, Ethan and Emily found themselves alone again. The golden light from the setting sun reflected through the windows, wrapping them both in warmth. "I have to ask you something," Emily said softly. He nodded, waiting. "Why do I get the feeling that you are not telling me everything? You disappear sometimes. You say you are between jobs. But your hands—" She paused, glancing at his wrist. "Your hands are not the hands of someone who works with machines or tools. They are too steady, too careful. You write like someone who signs important papers." Ethan smiled faintly, though his heart raced. "You are observant." "I am curious," she said, "and maybe a little scared." "Scared?" She nodded. "Because I like you, and I do not want to find out I have been wrong about who you are." He looked down, struggling with the truth pressing against his chest. "You have not been wrong about me," he said quietly. "You have just not seen all of me yet." Her eyes softened, though confusion lingered. "Then promise me one thing. When you are ready, you will tell me the truth." "I promise," he said, meaning it. Just then, the door opened and Ruth's voice called out, "Emily, there is someone here asking for you." A tall man in a suit entered, holding an envelope. "Miss Emily Green?" "Yes," she said, stepping forward. "This is for you, a letter from the Open Hands Foundation." Her eyes widened as she took it. "Already? I only submitted the application last night." The man smiled politely. They move quickly when they find someone who fits their values. Vu. When he left, Emily opened the envelope with trembling fingers. Inside was a neatly typed letter offering her a position as a community coordinator. Tears filled her eyes. "I got it," she whispered. "Mark, I actually got it." Ethan stood frozen, emotion tightening in his chest. He had arranged the offer himself through the foundation's board, ensuring her name was the first chosen. Seeing her so happy made it worth every risk. She threw her arms around him in joy, unaware of the storm that brewed behind his calm expression. "This is the start of something new," she said. "Yes," he replied softly. "It is." That evening, after she went home, Ethan drove across the city to his office tower. The night guard greeted him respectfully, and he returned the nod before taking the private elevator to the top floor. Inside his glass-walled office, the lights of the skyline stretched endlessly below him. Nara was waiting. "Sir, the board knows about your visits to that cafe. Someone recognized you from the street." Ethan closed his eyes. I expected that. They are asking questions about the open hands hiring process. It might lead back to her. Ethan's jaw tightened. She cannot find out this way. Nora sighed. Then you need to tell her yourself before someone else does. He looked out at the glittering city. I will. But not tonight. Tonight, she deserves to celebrate. Meanwhile, Emily sat on her small couch, holding the letter to her chest. She did not know why tears kept falling: joy, disbelief, maybe something deeper. On the table, the same $10 bill from their first meeting rested beside the letter, slightly crumpled but carefully kept. She smiled through her tears and whispered, "Every kindness counts." Across the city, in a tower of glass and steel, the man who had given her that $10 bill stood in silence, knowing that the truth he had been hiding was growing too large to keep. And soon, everything between them would change. The next morning dawned crisp and quiet. But the peace that filled the city did not reach Emily's heart. She woke before sunrise, unable to fall back asleep, her mind still spinning from the excitement of the night before. The letter from the Open Hands Foundation sat neatly folded on her nightstand. She had read it at least 10 times since receiving it. Every time her eyes reached the line that said, "We are honored to welcome you to our team," she still smiled in disbelief. When she arrived at the cafe that morning, Ruth was already there, her hair tied up and her expression curious. "You are glowing," Ruth said, setting down a tray of muffins. "Did you win the lottery or something?" "Better," Emily said, unable to hide her grin. "I got the job. The community coordinator position with the Open Hands Foundation." Ruth's eyes widened. "Wait, seriously? That was fast." "I know," Emily said, her hands trembling slightly as she poured coffee. "I sent the application just 2 nights ago. I still cannot believe it." "That is amazing," Ruth said sincerely, then paused. "But it is strange, is it not? How did they even find your application that quickly?" Emily hesitated. "Maybe they really liked what I wrote." "Maybe," Ruth said, her tone uncertain. "But Emily, something about this still feels too easy. You sure you want to go through with it?" Emily smiled softly. "Ruth, for once in my life, something good happened without me having to struggle. I am going to believe that it is real." Ruth sighed and nodded, though worry lingered in her eyes. Later that afternoon, the cafe was quiet, except for the faint hum of jazz music playing through the old speakers. The bell above the door chimed, and Emily turned, expecting a customer. Instead, it was Mark Ethan carrying that same gentle smile she had grown to trust. "Good afternoon," he said as he walked in. "I heard there is a new coordinator in town." She laughed, unable to hide her excitement. "You already know?" "News travels fast," he said. She handed him a cup of coffee, her fingers brushing his lightly. "Can you believe it? They picked me. I start next week." "I can believe it," he said quietly. They could not have chosen anyone better. His sincerity made her heart tighten. But as she looked at him, something flickered in his eyes, a shadow, fleeting but unmistakable. "You knew I would get it, did you not?" she asked, half joking but half serious. He hesitated. "I hoped you would." "La." Before she could respond, Ruth approached with her usual blunt tone. "Funny thing, Mark," she said. "You would not happen to know anything about that foundation, would you?" Ethan looked at her calmly. "Only what I read in the news." Ruth crossed her arms. "You are good at avoiding questions." Emily frowned. "Ruth, please." "No," Ruth interrupted gently. "I am happy for you, Em. Truly. But people do not just get dream jobs overnight, not without someone powerful making it happen. And your friend here, he seems to know more than he is letting on." Ethan's expression softened. "You have every right to protect your friend," he said evenly. "But I promise you, my intentions are good." "Intentions are one thing," Ruth said. "Truth is another." With that, she walked away, leaving a tense silence behind. Emily sighed. "I am sorry about that. Ruth means well. She just worries too much." "She is a good friend," Ethan said quietly. "The kind everyone needs." But the moment had shifted. Emily tried to smile, yet an uncomfortable question now rested between them. That evening, as the sun sank below the skyline, Ethan stood in his office again, the city glowing beneath him. Nora entered with a tablet in her hands. "Sir," she said carefully. It has started. What has started? The press caught wind of the foundation's hiring list. They are connecting the names. Someone noticed that one of the new hires is linked to a cafe you have been visiting for months. Ethan's heart dropped. Emily. Yes, Nora said. It is only a matter of time before they publish it. He turned away, gripping the edge of his desk. They will destroy her reputation before she even starts. Nora nodded. You could stop it if you make a statement first. But that would mean telling the world who she is to you. Ethan stared at the glowing skyline. And if I do not, they will twist it into something ugly. He rubbed his temples. For the first time, his two worlds were crashing together, the one built on power and control, and the one that felt real with her. He knew he had to make a choice soon, but either way, she would get hurt. Meanwhile, across town, Emily sat on her couch with the foundation packet spread across her lap. She was reading through the orientation details when her phone buzzed. It was a message from an unknown number. Congratulations on your new position. Must be nice to have powerful friends in high places. Enjoy it while it lasts. Her heart pounded. She reread the message, her hands shaking. Who could have sent it? She glanced at the letter again, then at the flyer that had led her there. For the first time, doubt began to creep in. The next morning, the doubt grew heavier when Ruth arrived holding her phone. Emily, you need to see this, she said. On the screen was an online article. CEO, Ethan Carter's secret connection to cafe worker raises questions about foundation's integrity. Beneath the headline was a photograph Emily, laughing behind the cafe counter, and Ethan, standing across from her with that unmistakable smile. Emily's blood ran cold. Ethan Carter? She whispered. Ruth looked at her in shock. You did not know? Emily shook her head, her voice breaking. He told me his name was Mark. The truth hit her like a sudden storm. The kindness, the quiet dinners, the way he had looked at her, it had all been real, and yet not real at all. Her heart felt torn between betrayal and disbelief. She sank into a chair, whispering to herself. Outside, the rain began again, tapping against the glass, steady and cold. The world that had once felt warm and full of hope now seemed to blur into gray. And for the first time, Emily wished she had never met the man who had taught her kindness could hurt too. The storm outside matched the one inside her heart. Rain pounded against the cafe windows as Emily sat motionless at the small table near the counter, her hands still trembling from what she had just read. The online article glowed harshly on Ruth's phone screen, the headline repeating over and over in her mind. CEO Ethan Carter's secret connection to cafe worker raises questions about foundation's integrity. Ethan Carter. Not Mark. Not the quiet man in the denim jacket who forgot his wallet that night, but a billionaire CEO who had been hiding behind a false name. Her voice was barely a whisper. He lied to me. Ruth sat down across from her, her expression filled with worry. Emily, I swear I did not know. But this explains everything, the job, how fast the offer came, why he kept dodging questions. Emily stared out the window. The rain blurred everything beyond the glass, turning the city into streaks of gray and gold. He said he wanted to understand ordinary people, she said bitterly. But I was not an experiment. I was a person. Ruth reached for her hand, but Emily pulled away gently. I just need to think. Who? Across town, Ethan sat in his office, staring at the same article on his computer screen. The comments section was already filled with cruel speculation. Some accused him of favoritism. Others mocked Emily, calling her the coffee shop girl who caught a billionaire. His chest ached as he scrolled through the endless noise. He had spent his entire life managing headlines. But this one felt different because it was about her. Nora entered the room quietly. Sir, the board is demanding a public statement. They want to suspend the foundation until this is resolved. Ethan stood abruptly. Suspend it? The foundation has done nothing wrong. The media does not care about truth, sir, she said softly. They care about stories, and right now, this story is out of your control. He clenched his fists, his jaw tightening. I will fix it, but first, I need to see her. Nora hesitated. That might make things worse. He turned toward her, his voice steady but low. It cannot get worse than hurting her in silence. That evening, the rain still had not stopped. The cafe was empty, its lights dim, when Ethan pushed open the door. Emily was cleaning the counter, her movements mechanical, her eyes swollen from crying. When she looked up and saw him standing there, something inside her cracked. "You should not be here," she said quietly. "I know," he replied, "but I had to see you." She set the cloth down and faced him fully. "Why? To tell me more lies?" He flinched at her tone. "No. To tell you the truth, all of it." Her voice rose, shaking with emotion. "The truth? You had months to tell me the truth, Ethan. You looked me in the eye every day while pretending to be someone else. You let me talk about my life, my dreams, while you hid yours. I never wanted to hurt you," he said. "When I met you, I was lost. I wanted to know what life felt like without titles, without money. And then I met you, someone who saw the world through kindness, not status. You reminded me what it means to be human." She laughed softly, but there was no joy in it. "And you reminded me what it means to be a fool." He stepped closer. "Emily, please. Do not," she said, backing away. "Do not say my name like that." Her eyes glistened as she struggled to keep her composure. "Do you have any idea what it feels like to find out your entire story was someone else's experiment?" "It was never an experiment," he said desperately. "It was real. Every word, every look, every moment with you was real." She shook her head. "You had a choice. You could have told me, you could have trusted me, but instead, you let the world tell me first." Silence filled the space between them, heavy and suffocating. The rain outside grew louder, echoing against the windows like applause for a tragedy. Finally, she spoke again, her voice barely above a whisper. "You once said that kindness was the only thing that mattered. Was that just another line for your notebook?" He swallowed hard. "No, it was because of you that I believed it again." Tears slid down her cheeks, and she brushed them away quickly. "Then prove it. Leave me alone. Let me live without your name hanging over mine." "Oh." He took a step back, pain flashing across his face. "If that is what you want, I will go." She turned away before he could see her cry again. "It is not what I want, Ethan. It is what I need." He hesitated for a moment longer, his heart breaking in the silence. Then, without another word, he walked out into the storm. The door closed behind him, with a soft chime that sounded too final. Emily sank to the floor behind the counter, her shoulders shaking. The rain kept falling, relentless and cold, washing the streets clean while her heart stayed heavy with what could not be undone. Across the city, Ethan stood on the balcony of his penthouse, drenched in rain, staring at the skyline he once ruled. Every light below him felt distant, meaningless. He whispered to himself, "Every kindness counts," but the words sounded hollow now. He had built an empire with logic and power, but the one thing he truly wanted could not be bought or rebuilt. Somewhere across the city, a girl who had once believed in him was now breaking because of him. And as the night deepened, both of them realized that the truth, no matter how honest, can arrive too late to heal the damage already done. The next few days passed in silence, the kind that felt louder than any words. Emily moved through her routines, as if she were made of glass, fragile, transparent, one touch away from breaking. The cafe felt emptier even when it was full, and every time the bell above the door rang, her heart betrayed her by hoping it might be him, but it never was. The news about Ethan Carter and the cafe girl had spread faster than she could comprehend. Strangers came in pretending to buy coffee, only to glance at her like she was some headline made flesh. Some whispered, others stared, but no one saw her the way he once had. Ruth stayed close, hovering like a silent guardian. "You do not owe anyone an explanation," she said one morning, as Emily wiped the same counter for the 10th time. Emily forced a faint smile. "Maybe not, but it feels like everyone already decided what kind of person I am." "They are wrong," Ruth said firmly. "You know who you are. That is all that matters." But even as her friend spoke, Emily could not stop the ache in her chest. She had told herself she would not cry again. But every night she lay awake, hearing his voice in her mind, the way he said her name, the way he told her kindness mattered. Across the city, Ethan was fighting a different kind of storm. His office was filled with advisors, lawyers, and public relations experts, all talking at once. "We need to control the narrative," one said. "Deny the personal connection," another insisted. Ethan raised his hand, and the room fell silent. "No, I will not lie." "No," one of the older board members frowned. With respect, sir, your honesty is costing this company millions. The foundation's sponsors are pulling out. The press is eating this up. Ethan's gaze hardened. If the price of doing the right thing is losing a few investors, then let them go. After the meeting, Nara entered quietly, closing the door behind her. Sir, the public backlash is not just about you anymore. People are targeting her. She is being followed by reporters. She cannot even walk home without cameras in her face. Ethan stood abruptly. Where is she? She refused your security team's help, Nara said softly. She said she does not want anything from you. The words hit him like a physical blow. He sank into his chair, his voice breaking. I did this. I wanted to prove something about humanity, and now I have ruined the only person who reminded me of it. That night, Ethan made a decision. The next morning, Emily walked to the cafe early. The air was cold, the sky heavy with clouds. She wanted to lose herself in work, to forget everything, even if only for a few hours. But when she reached the door, a small envelope was taped to it with her name written in careful handwriting. Inside was a single letter. Emily, I know you do not want to see me, and I do not deserve to ask for forgiveness. But please know this, I never tried to buy your kindness or your trust. Everything I said to you was real. The Open Hands Foundation was not created for a headline. It was created because of you, because your words reminded me that kindness is not weakness. You gave me back the part of myself I thought I lost. I am stepping down as CEO of Carter Holdings. The foundation will continue under new leadership, and your position there will remain untouched. You earned it, Emily. You changed lives, including mine. If walking away is the only way to give you peace, then that is what I will do. But I will always be grateful for the girl who taught me that every kindness counts. Ethan. Emily's eyes blurred as she finished reading. Her first instinct was anger. He thought a letter could fix what was broken, but as she read it again, something inside her softened. There was no excuse in his words, only sincerity. And for the first time, she wondered if maybe he had been as lost as she was. She folded the letter carefully and tucked it into her apron pocket before unlocking the cafe door. Later that day, as the cafe filled with the familiar noise of chatter and clinking cups, Ruth arrived breathless. Emily, turn on the television. The small screen above the counter flickered to life, showing a live press conference. Ethan stood at a podium, calm but clearly exhausted. Cameras flashed, and reporters shouted questions. He began to speak. For too long, I believed success meant control. But a few months ago, I met someone who showed me that true success is found in integrity and compassion. My actions hurt someone I deeply respect, and for that, I am stepping down as CEO effective immediately. The Open Hands Foundation will remain independent, focused on helping people without judgment or favoritism. This decision is final. Reporters shouted his name, but he stepped away from the microphone. Emily stood frozen, her hand pressed against her mouth. Ruth whispered, "He actually did it." Tears welled in Emily's eyes, but she blinked them away. He meant what he said. When the cafe closed that evening, she sat alone with the letter in her hands again. She thought about the man who had once walked into her life, pretending to be poor, not to deceive, but to understand. She thought about how broken he had looked the night he left, and how honest his voice had sounded today. For the first time since everything fell apart, she allowed herself to breathe without bitterness. She whispered softly into the quiet cafe, "Every kindness counts." Across town, Ethan watched the city lights one last time from his office window before leaving the building for good. The suit he wore no longer felt like armor, only fabric. He slipped the old denim jacket over his shoulders, the same one he had worn the first night he met her, and walked into the rain. For the first time in years, he did not feel like a CEO. He felt like a man learning, step by step, how to be human again. The following week unfolded slowly, like a movie after the climax where no one knew what would happen next. The world moved on, but for Emily, time still felt fragile. She went to work, smiled for customers, and spoke with Ruth, as if everything were normal, yet a quiet ache lived behind every breath she took. The letter from Ethan stayed in her apron pocket for days. She told herself she would throw it away, that moving on meant cutting ties with everything that reminded her of him. But each time she reached for it, her hands froze. She could not bring herself to destroy something that, despite everything, had been written with truth. Outside the cafe, Winter began to show its first signs. The wind had turned sharp, sweeping dry leaves down the street. Business slowed. People hurried in only for warmth and coffee before disappearing again. Ruth noticed how Emily had grown quieter. "You still thinking about him?" she asked one morning while restocking the counter. Emily sighed. "I wish I was not. But it is hard to forget someone who saw you in ways no one else ever did." Ruth nodded. "He made a mistake, sure. But maybe he tried to fix it the only way he knew how." Emily looked at her friend. "He gave up everything, Ruth. His company. His reputation. He did not need to do that." Ruth smiled softly. "Maybe he finally learned what you were trying to teach him." For the first time in weeks, Emily smiled, a small, real smile that reached her eyes. That afternoon, as she was closing the cafe, a man entered just before the sign flipped to closed. He wore a dark coat and carried a folder. "Miss Emily Green?" he asked politely. "Yes?" He handed her an envelope. "I am from the Open Hands Foundation. I was told to deliver this personally." When he left, Emily opened the envelope. Inside was another letter, this time on official foundation paper. "Dear Emily, we are pleased to inform you that, after internal restructuring, you have been promoted to Director of Community Outreach. This decision was made unanimously by the new board. Your dedication, integrity, and compassion have inspired every person you have worked with. We hope you continue leading with the same heart that has already changed so many lives." There was no signature, just the foundation's logo. But she knew. Somehow, she just knew. She folded the letter slowly and whispered, "Ethan." Over the next few weeks, Emily began her new role. Her days filled with visits to community centers, meetings with volunteers, and small but meaningful victories, families receiving housing aid, local bakeries supporting food drives, and single parents finding stable work. She worked harder than ever, not for recognition, but because it finally felt like her life had purpose again. One afternoon, as she left the foundation office, she saw a familiar figure across the street. He stood under a streetlight, holding an umbrella, the same denim jacket beneath a worn coat. For a moment, she thought her mind was playing tricks on her. But then he looked up, and their eyes met. Her heart stopped. He crossed the street slowly, each step careful, as if unsure whether he was welcome. When he stopped in front of her, neither spoke for a long moment. "You are supposed to be miles away," she finally said. "I was," he said quietly. "But I heard about your promotion. I wanted to see it for myself." She studied him, his face thinner, his eyes tired but peaceful. "You really stepped away from everything, did you not?" He nodded. "I did. I needed to learn how to live without a boardroom telling me who I am." "And who are you now?" she asked softly. He smiled faintly. "Someone trying to earn back the right to stand in front of you." "Oh." The wind brushed past them, carrying the faint scent of roasted chestnuts from a nearby cart. Emily held his gaze, unsure what to say. The part of her that had been broken still hurt. But another part, the part that had always believed in kindness, could not ignore the sincerity in his eyes. "You once told me that kindness multiplies," he said. "I never understood that until now. The foundation is doing more than I ever imagined. That is because of you, Emily. You made it what it was meant to be." She blinked back the emotion rising in her chest. Maybe we both needed to remember what matters. For a moment, the world seemed to shrink around them. The noise of the street faded into nothing. Ethan reached into his pocket and pulled out something small, a slightly wrinkled $10 bill, framed in clear plastic. "I kept this," he said softly, "from the first day we met. You gave it without thinking twice. It reminded me that worth has nothing to do with money." She looked at it, tears forming in her eyes. "You still have it?" "Every day," he said. "Because every kindness counts. You taught me that." She took a slow breath, unsure if her heart could handle what she felt. Forgiveness was not instant, and love, once cracked, took time to mend. But standing there in the soft winter light, she realized something. Their story had never been about status or betrayal. It had always been about learning how to see the good that still existed in people, even after mistakes. She looked at him and said quietly, "I do not know where this goes from here." He nodded. "Neither do I. But if you let me, I would like to start again, honestly this time." For a long moment, Emily said nothing. Then, with a trembling smile, she whispered. One step at a time. He smiled too, relief softening his face. One step at a time. They began walking together down the quiet street, the evening lights glowing above them. It was not a grand reconciliation, not a dramatic ending, just two people learning to rebuild trust under the same sky that had once separated them. And as snow began to fall, Emily realized that forgiveness, like kindness, grows slowly, but when it finally blooms, it brings warmth even to the coldest winter. The next morning came quietly, with pale sunlight filtering through the gray winter clouds. Emily woke early, her thoughts still lingering on the moment she had seen Ethan again. It had been weeks since everything had fallen apart, and yet, seeing him last night standing under that streetlight felt like the world had turned a small circle back to where it began, only softer, calmer, older somehow. She sat by her window with a cup of coffee, watching snowflakes drift down slowly to the street below. There was peace in the stillness, but also uncertainty. She did not know what their next step would be, and for once, she was not rushing to find out. Forgiveness, she realized, was not something that arrived in a single moment. It was built quietly, through small acts of truth. At the foundation office, she was greeted with warm smiles. The team had grown since the reorganization, and people now spoke of kindness as if it were a real, measurable value. Posters along the hallway read, "Empathy is action," a motto she had helped write. Every time she saw it, she thought of Ethan's words. Every kindness counts. Around noon, a delivery arrived for her desk. It was a small brown box tied neatly with a ribbon. Inside, she found a handwritten note and a single framed photograph. The note read, "I wanted you to have this." It was taken the first day we opened the new community kitchen. I was standing behind the crowd, watching you speak to them. You looked proud, not of yourself, but of everyone else. That is what leadership looks like. At the bottom, he had written simply, "Ethan." Emily smiled softly as she looked at the photograph. It showed her standing beside a group of volunteers, her hair tied up, her hands covered in flour from helping bake bread for families. She remembered that day clearly, the laughter, the scent of fresh rolls, the warmth of something real being built. That evening, as she was preparing to leave work, she heard a soft knock on her office door. When she looked up, Ethan was there. He looked different, more grounded, his presence no longer commanding, but gentle. He carried a folder in his hands. "I hope I am not interrupting," he said quietly. She shook her head. "No, come in." He walked in and handed her the folder. "These are the new proposals for the next quarter. The board asked for my opinion, but I told them to give the final word to you." "No." She glanced through the pages, recognizing his handwriting in the margins, small notes filled with thoughtful questions, not commands. "You did not have to do that," she said. He smiled faintly. "I did. You are the heart of this place now. I am just here to help if you ever need it." The honesty in his tone left her momentarily speechless. He was no longer the CEO who hid behind power or the man who lied to test the world. He was simply Ethan, a man who had learned humility the hard way. As he turned to leave, she said softly, "Ethan, wait." He paused. "You can stay," she said. "If you want to help, I mean. Not as the man who used to run everything, but as someone who believes in what this foundation stands for." He met her eyes, gratitude shining in them. "That is all I have wanted since the beginning." They shared a quiet moment, one that did not need grand words. The air between them was no longer filled with the sharp edges of anger or regret. It was warm with something gentler, something close to healing. When he left the office, Emily stood for a long time, watching the snow fall outside the window. For the first time in months, the ache in her heart felt lighter. Maybe some stories did not need perfect endings. Maybe it was enough that they had both found their way back to the truth. As she turned off the lights and locked the door, her reflection in the glass smiled faintly. The world outside was still cold, but inside her chest, something was beginning to thaw. Winter deepened over the city, covering everything in quiet white. Streets slowed down, people walked bundled in thick coats, and the world seemed to breathe in softer rhythms. Inside the Open Hands Foundation, warmth filled the air in a different way through laughter, the scent of baked bread, and the steady hum of volunteers working side by side. Emily had begun to settle into her new role with quiet confidence. Each day she arrived early, greeting everyone by name, making sure the smallest details were right, the coffee warm, the lights soft, the space welcoming. What once had been her dream had now become her purpose. Yet somewhere in that calm, she could feel the undercurrent of a new storm building beyond the walls. One Thursday morning, she noticed the worried expression on one of the volunteers, a young man named Luis. "Everything all right?" she asked. He hesitated. "You have not seen the news today?" She shook her head. "No. Why?" He handed her his phone. On the screen was a headline that made her stomach tighten. Open Hands Foundation under scrutiny after anonymous allegations of misused funds. Oh, Emily felt the blood drain from her face. "That cannot be true," she whispered. "It says the board is investigating," Luis said quietly. "People online are already talking." Before she could respond, her phone buzzed with a message from Ruth. "Emily, are you at work? The news looks bad. Call me as soon as you can." By midday, the story had spread across every major outlet. Reporters gathered outside the foundation building, cameras flashing, employees whispered nervously, and the calm atmosphere turned to confusion. Ethan arrived shortly after noon, his face grim. He found Emily in her office, surrounded by papers and unanswered calls. "I saw the reports," he said. "We both know this is not true, but it is going to get worse before it gets better." She looked up at him, her voice steady despite the chaos. "Why is this happening now?" He hesitated. "Because the foundation is growing, and there are people who do not like seeing power shift from profit to compassion." Emily frowned. "Do you think someone is targeting us?" "I do not think," he said quietly. "I know." He placed a folder on her desk. Inside were copies of emails and financial documents that had been altered to make it look like money had gone missing. "These are forged," he explained. "Someone from the old board must be behind it. They want to destroy what we built." Emily rubbed her temples, the weight of it pressing down. "They are not just attacking the foundation," she said softly. "They are attacking everything we stand for." Ethan nodded. "Which is why we have to stand firm. No hiding this time. We face it together." The determination in his voice stirred something in her chest. This was not the same man who once lived behind walls of secrecy and pride. He was open now, transparent, ready to fight, not for status, but for truth. By evening, the two of them stood before the gathered staff and volunteers. The tension in the room was thick, but Emily's calm voice cut through it. "The Open Hands Foundation was built on one promise," she said. "To help people with honesty and dignity. We will not let lies destroy that. We will cooperate fully with every investigation and prove our integrity through our actions." Her words steadied the room. Ethan stepped forward beside her. "We built this place on kindness," he said, "and kindness is stronger than fear. Whatever happens, we will not abandon what is right." Applause rose slowly, then grew into something powerful. For the first time since the headlines broke, hope flickered again. That night, after the crowd dispersed, Emily stood by the window, watching the snow fall. Ethan joined her, his coat draped over his arm. "You handled that beautifully," he said softly. "Your mother would be proud." She smiled faintly. "You think so?" "I know so." Outside, the city lights blurred beneath the falling snow, and for a fleeting moment, it felt as though the world was still. They did not know what tomorrow would bring: more headlines, more accusations, but for now, they had truth, they had purpose, and they had each other. And sometimes, that was enough to stand against any storm. The storm that followed the allegations hit harder than anyone at the foundation had expected. By the end of the week, television anchors and online commentators spoke about it as if it were already a proven scandal. Donors paused their funding, social media filled with rumors, and every day more cameras waited outside the entrance, searching for a new headline. Through it all, Emily refused to hide. She arrived early each morning, greeted every staff member, and worked longer hours than anyone else. But inside, exhaustion was beginning to wear her down. The same reporters who once praised her story as an inspiring rise from waitress to leader now questioned whether she had been a puppet for a billionaire's failed redemption. Ruth called her almost every night, worried. "Emily, you need to rest," she said over the phone. "I cannot," Emily replied. "If I stop now, people will lose faith in what we built." Ruth sighed. Just remember, you do not have to carry this alone. But Emily already knew that. She just did not know how to let anyone else help, not after everything that had happened. One morning, as she reviewed documents at her desk, Ethan entered the office. He looked tired, his usual calm now shadowed with something heavier. "There is something you need to see," he said, placing a folder in front of her. Inside were photographs, bank statements, and a printed email thread. "One of the board members from the old company," he explained, "hired a private investigator. They manipulated old records to make it look like we funneled donations into my personal accounts." Emily scanned the papers quickly. "But these accounts are closed. This is all fake." "I know," he said quietly, "but proving that will take time, and the media is not patient." She set the papers down and looked at him. "You think this is because of you?" He hesitated, then nodded. "Someone wants to make sure I never rebuild my reputation. They cannot touch the company anymore, so they are targeting the one thing I care about now." Her voice softened. "The foundation. And you," he admitted. Silence settled between them for a long moment. Finally, Emily said, "Then we will fight this together." He looked at her, surprised. "After everything I have done, you still want to stand beside me?" She met his eyes without hesitation. "You told me once that kindness is action, not words. I believe that. I am not standing with you because I owe you anything. I am standing with you because this is right." The sincerity in her voice left him speechless. For the first time in days, the lines of tension on his face eased. Over the next week, they worked side by side. Ethan contacted auditors and lawyers, while Emily coordinated public communication with the staff. Together, they opened every record for inspection, releasing all financial documents online to prove transparency. It was a bold move, one that few organizations would dare take, but it was the only way to restore trust. Still, the attacks did not stop. One evening, after another long day of calls and meetings, Emily found herself sitting alone in the dimly lit office. Snow fell outside again, covering the streets like ash. She stared at the glowing city and wondered if doing good always had to hurt this much. The door creaked open behind her. Ethan stepped in quietly, holding 2 cups of coffee. "You should go home," he said. She smiled tiredly. "You sound like Ruth." "She is right. You have been here since dawn." "So have you," she replied. He chuckled softly. "Then we are both terrible at listening." He sat across from her, handing her one of the cups. For a while, they said nothing, just sat in silence, the sound of falling snow muffled against the window. Finally, Emily spoke. "Do you ever regret it? Walking away from your company, your old life?" Ethan looked thoughtful. "Every now and then, yes. But then I think about what that life cost me, my peace, my integrity, the ability to see people as people. And then I realize, no amount of power is worth losing your soul." She looked at him quietly, her voice soft. "You sound like someone who finally found himself." He smiled faintly. "Maybe because of someone who refused to give up on what is good." "Oh." Her heart tightened at his words. Not from pain this time, but from something gentler, something that felt like healing. Just then, her phone buzzed with a message. It was from one of the auditors. She opened it, and her eyes widened. "Ethan," she said quickly, handing him the phone. "They found something. One of the false documents traces back to a company owned by a former Carter Holdings executive." He read the message carefully, his jaw tightening. "Then we finally have proof." Emily's heart lifted for the first time in weeks. "We can clear our names." Ethan nodded. "Not just ours, the foundation's. Every volunteer, every person who believed in what we do." She smiled through tired eyes. "We did this together." He looked at her and said quietly, "No, Emily, you did this. You turned my mistake into something worth saving." As the snow continued to fall outside, Emily leaned back in her chair, feeling something she had not felt in a long time: peace. The truth was finally within reach, and for once, it was not just about redemption or justice. It was about proving that goodness, when tested, could still endure. Outside, the city glowed under the white blanket of winter. Inside, 2 people sat side by side, bound not by circumstance or status, but by something far greater: faith in the simple power of doing what is right. The following morning arrived with a quiet sense of purpose. The air outside was cold and crisp, but the heaviness that had hung over the foundation for weeks finally began to lift. Emily arrived early, as always, though this time her steps carried something new: determination, mixed with cautious hope. Ethan was already in the conference room, papers spread across the long wooden table. He looked up when she entered, offering a small, tired smile. "I have not slept," he admitted, "but we finally have everything we need." "No." Emily set her coffee down beside him and glanced at the documents. The evidence from the auditors was clear: emails, timestamps, and bank transfers that traced the false accusations directly to a shell company managed by one of Ethan's former executives. "This proves they forged everything," she said. "They tried to destroy us." Ethan nodded slowly. "They wanted to punish me, and they used you to do it." She looked at him, her expression steady. "Then we will show them that truth does not break that easily." Later that morning, the boardroom filled with people, the foundation's leadership, a few reporters, and the legal team. Cameras lined the back wall, flashing occasionally. The room buzzed with quiet tension until Emily stood at the podium. Her voice was calm, but it carried strength. "The Open Hands Foundation was created to serve those who are too often ignored," she began. "Recently, we faced allegations that threatened to undo everything we have worked for. Today, we are here not to defend our pride, but to present the truth." She gestured to the screen behind her, where documents appeared: bank statements, correspondence records, and signatures that proved the accusations were fabrications. Independent auditors have verified that the false transactions were created by a third party, connected to a former executive who was dismissed from Carter Holdings 2 years ago. The evidence has been submitted to the authorities. Ethan stepped forward next to her, his voice steady and low. "I take full responsibility for allowing my past to follow me here. I built walls of wealth that protected me but hurt others. When those walls fell, I saw what truly mattered: honesty, compassion, and people who do good because it is right, not because it is easy. This foundation stands because of them, not because of me." There was silence in the room for a long moment. Then the sound of applause began, soft at first, then stronger, filling the space with something that felt like relief. When the press conference ended, Emily and Ethan stepped outside together. The cold wind brushed against their faces, but for once, it did not bite. It felt clean, sharp, alive. Reporters were already sharing the news, headlines shifting from scandal to vindication. Ruth called within minutes. "Emily, it is everywhere! They cleared your name!" Emily laughed softly, the sound breaking through weeks of tension. "It is not just mine," she said. "It is all of ours." Ethan stood beside her quietly, watching her smile. For the first time since the beginning, she looked free, not the cautious woman burdened by whispers, but the person he had met that night in the cafe, giving without hesitation. "You saved this place," he said. She turned to him. "No, Ethan. We saved each other." He wanted to say more, but for once, words felt unnecessary. They stood there in silence, the foundation behind them, glowing with the promise of new beginnings. As the sun began to break through the clouds, Emily looked up at the light. "Do you know what I realized?" she asked softly. "What?" he said. "That no matter how dark things get, kindness always finds a way through. It may bend, it may shake, but it does not disappear." Ethan smiled. "You sound like the woman who once handed a stranger $10 without a second thought." She laughed quietly. Maybe she was onto something after all. They walked down the steps together, the noise of the city surrounding them like background music. For the first time in a long while, both of them felt at peace, not because everything was perfect, but because they had chosen truth over fear and compassion over pride. And somewhere deep down, both knew that this was not the end of their story. It was the beginning of something finally real. The morning after the press conference felt different. The city woke under a soft golden light, as if even the winter sun wanted to mark a quiet victory. For weeks, the headlines had carried suspicion and accusation. But now, every newspaper and online outlet shared a different message. The Open Hands Foundation, proven innocent. Emily stood at the window of the foundation's office, holding a warm cup of coffee. Outside, volunteers were unloading boxes of donations for the weekend drive. Their laughter echoed faintly through the glass. It was a sound she had missed. For the first time in months, it felt like hope had returned. Ethan entered the room a few moments later, carrying a file under his arm. "The final report from the auditors," he said. "It is official now. We are cleared." She turned toward him with a gentle smile. "I still cannot believe it is over." He nodded, setting the file on her desk. "It is over, but not forgotten. The world will move on to the next story tomorrow, but what we do next, that is what people will remember." Emily sipped her coffee, thinking about his words. "You sound like a man planning something." He smiled faintly. "Maybe I am. I was offered a seat back on the Carter Holdings board this morning." Her eyes widened slightly. "Are you going to take it?" He shook his head. "No. I have spent enough years in glass towers. I want to build something that actually matters." Her curiosity grew. "What do you mean?" He took a deep breath. "I want to open a training center under the foundation, something that helps people rebuild their lives after losing everything. A place where we do not just give aid, but teach skills and confidence. It will take time, but I want to start it right here." Emily looked at him, her heart swelling with quiet admiration. "You never stop trying to make things better, do you?" He chuckled. "Not since I met someone who reminded me what better looks like." "Oh." Her cheeks warmed, and she looked away for a moment. "If you start it, I will help." "I was hoping you would say that," he said softly. As the days passed, their plan began to take shape. They called it the Bridge Program, a name Ethan came up with to represent the space between struggle and stability. Together, they worked on proposals, met with community partners, and gathered support from small businesses. Unlike corporate projects, this one grew through people, not profit. Ruth stopped by one afternoon, bringing lunch for the team. She leaned against the doorway of Emily's office, watching her and Ethan buried in paperwork. "You two are starting to look like a proper team again," she teased. Emily smiled. "We never stopped being one." Ethan looked up with a grin. "Ruth, you always seem to appear when the hard work is almost done." "Someone has to keep you humble," she replied. As they ate together, the air in the office felt lighter. There was laughter, conversation, and a sense of belonging that no scandal could erase. The foundation was not just surviving anymore, it was thriving. By the end of the week, the first community event for the Bridge Program was scheduled. Emily stood on the stage in the main hall, rehearsing her speech, while volunteers arranged chairs. Ethan watched from the back, his hands in his pockets, pride shining quietly in his eyes. When she noticed him, she laughed. "You are staring again." "Guilty," he admitted. "You make public speaking look easy." "It is not," she said. "I am terrified every single time." "Then maybe that is what makes you good at it," he replied. That evening, when the event began, the hall was full. Families, students, and local leaders gathered to hear about the new program. Emily spoke with steady confidence, her words weaving through the room with warmth. She talked about second chances, about kindness, as a force that can rebuild broken things. Her closing words lingered in the air long after she stepped away from the podium. Sometimes the smallest act, a meal, a hand, a word, becomes the bridge that carries someone back to hope. The applause that followed was loud and sincere. Ethan joined her on stage as the crowd stood, cheering not for a company or a name, but for what they represented: redemption, unity, and resilience. After the event ended, they stood outside the hall, beneath the quiet night sky. The cold air carried the faint scent of snow again. "You did it," Ethan said softly. "You made them believe again." Emily looked up at the stars, smiling. "No, we did it. You believed when it would have been easier to disappear." He looked at her, his voice low. "I did disappear once. I do not want to do that again." For a long moment, they stood in silence, just two silhouettes beneath the soft glow of streetlights. There were no grand gestures, no confessions, only the quiet understanding that something new had begun. Emily turned to him and said gently, "Whatever comes next, let us build it slowly, one honest step at a time." Ethan nodded. "That is all I could ever want." On sake, the night wind brushed between them, carrying with it the quiet hum of the city, a reminder that life was still moving, still unfolding, and that healing was not found in the headlines, but in the quiet choices people make after the storm. For the first time in years, both of them felt like they were no longer running from the past. They were walking toward the future, together. The next few weeks brought a new rhythm to their lives, one built not on survival but on rebuilding. The bridge program was officially launched, and word spread quickly throughout the city. Each day, more people came: single parents, young students, veterans, and workers who had lost everything during hard times. They came not for charity, but for a chance to start again. Emily found herself in the middle of it all, guiding volunteers, listening to stories, and helping wherever she could. She no longer felt like a woman who had been wounded by betrayal. She felt like someone who had found her purpose again. On a quiet Thursday morning, she stood in the new training center as sunlight streamed through the tall windows. A group of participants sat in a circle, sharing what they had learned so far. A young mother named Clara spoke softly, holding her child in her lap. "When I first came here," Clara said, "I did not believe in people anymore. But now I see that kindness still exists. You reminded me that I am not alone." Emily smiled, her heart full. "That is what this place is for," she said. "We all need someone to remind us of our worth." After the session ended, Ethan arrived with boxes of new supplies. His coat was dusted with snow, and his expression carried the same quiet calm that had become familiar to everyone at the foundation. "You missed the morning group," she said, helping him unpack the boxes. "I heard them from the hallway," he replied with a soft smile. "You have a gift, Emily. People listen when you speak." She laughed gently. "I think they listen because they want to believe in something good." He looked at her, his voice steady. "They believe because they see it in you." Their eyes met for a moment that lingered longer than either expected. The warmth between them was no longer uncertain. It was honest, steady, and earned through every hardship they had faced. Later that afternoon, the foundation received a letter from the mayor's office. Emily opened it carefully, while Ethan watched. The letter congratulated the Open Hands Foundation and the Bridge Program for their success and announced that the city had approved additional funding for expansion. Emily looked up with wide eyes. "They want to open 2 more centers." Ethan smiled. "You see, the truth always finds its way forward." That evening, they decided to celebrate with the staff and volunteers. The cafe where they first met had been decorated with soft lights, and the smell of fresh bread filled the air. Ruth had arranged everything, refusing to take no for an answer. As people shared laughter and stories, Emily stood by the window, watching the snow fall outside. Ethan approached, holding 2 cups of coffee. "Déjà vu?" he asked, handing her one. She smiled. "Except this time, you are not pretending to forget your wallet." He chuckled. "I still think about that day sometimes. How something so small turned into all of this." She took a sip of her coffee, the warmth spreading through her hands. "Maybe that is how life works," she said. "You give one small kindness, and it ripples out farther than you can see." He looked at her, his expression soft. "And sometimes, it brings you back to the person who changed everything." The music in the background shifted to a slower tune. Around them, people began to dance, some awkwardly, some gracefully. Ruth waved at them from across the room. "Go on, you two. Do not just stand there." Emily laughed, a little embarrassed. "I am not much of a dancer." Ethan extended his hand. "Then let me make you one." She hesitated only for a moment before placing her hand in his. He led her gently to the small open space in the center of the room. The movement was simple, no grand gestures, just the quiet rhythm of 2 people who finally understood each other. As they danced, the world outside continued to fall softly and white. For a brief moment, everything felt still: the noise, the pain, the years of pretending. All of it faded until there was only this. 2 people who had been broken by circumstance, but rebuilt through honesty and compassion. When the song ended, neither let go immediately. Emily looked up at him and said softly, "You know, I think this is what redemption really looks like." He smiled. "Not perfection, just progress." "Oh, exactly," she said. "We are learning, we are growing, and maybe that is enough." They returned to the table as laughter filled the room once more. The night carried on, full of warmth and life, and for the first time, there was no shadow of what had been lost, only the light of what had been found. Later, as they stepped outside into the snow, Ethan looked up at the sky. "Do you ever wonder," he asked, "what would have happened if that night in the cafe had gone differently?" Emily thought for a moment, then smiled. "Maybe fate does not make mistakes. Maybe we just need time to understand them." He nodded, slipping his hands into his pockets. Then, I am glad we took the long way. She looked at him, her voice soft but certain. So am I. Up, the city around them glowed under the falling snow, and as they walked together through the quiet streets, the path ahead no longer felt uncertain. It felt open, wide, and full of promise, a story no longer defined by secrets or regret, but by the steady, patient kind of love that comes only after forgiveness. Winter slowly gave way to spring, and the city began to breathe again. The cold gray skies turned into pale blue, and the streets that had once been covered in snow now bloomed with new colors. The Open Hands Foundation grew busier than ever. People filled the halls of the bridge program, and every room echoed with the sound of rebuilding, typing keyboards, laughter from classes, and the rhythmic hum of second chances being written in real time. Emily stood by the bulletin board one morning, reading thank you notes pinned up by participants. The words were simple, handwritten messages about finding work, paying rent, reuniting with families, but to her, they meant everything. Each one was proof that something good could rise from brokenness. Ethan entered the main hall, carrying 2 cups of coffee. "You keep reading those like they are poetry," he said, smiling as he handed her one. "They are," she replied. "Every single one." He chuckled. "Then you have a whole wall of poetry now." "Me?" They shared a small laugh, comfortable in the easy silence that followed. Over the past few months, they had fallen into a rhythm that neither labeled nor rushed. They worked together every day, learned from each other, and built something that felt more solid than words could describe. But that morning, something in Ethan's expression was different. His usual calm was there. But behind it, a quiet weight lingered. "Everything all right?" Emily asked gently. He hesitated before answering. "There is an offer on the table, from a new company overseas. They want me to help start a global initiative similar to what we have built here." Her heart skipped. "That sounds incredible." "It is," he said softly. "But it would mean being away for at least a year." The words hung in the air like dust caught in sunlight. Emily nodded slowly, trying to steady her voice. "You deserve that chance, Ethan. You have done so much good here, but maybe the world needs more of it." He looked at her, his eyes searching hers. "What if the best thing I have built is already here?" Her breath caught. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The world outside seemed to fade, leaving only the sound of her heartbeat and the faint hum of the lights above. "Ethan," she began, her voice barely above a whisper, "you do not need to choose between doing good and staying here. Whatever you decide, this what we built will keep growing. That is the point of kindness. It continues, even when people move on." He nodded, though his eyes lingered on her a moment longer than necessary. "You always know how to make the hard things sound simple." She smiled faintly. "It is not simple, it is just honest." The rest of the day passed in a blur of meetings and phone calls, but Emily found herself distracted, thinking about what his departure would mean, not just for the foundation, but for her. He had become part of her daily life, her quiet constant, her friend who understood her in ways others could not. The thought of the building without his calm presence made the hallways feel emptier already. That evening, after most of the staff had left, Emily stayed late to finish sorting paperwork. She was so lost in thought that she did not hear the footsteps behind her until he spoke. "Still here?" Ethan asked softly. She turned, startled. "I could say the same about you." He walked closer, setting his coat on the chair. "I was hoping you had not left yet." She tilted her head. "Why?" He took a deep breath. "Because I need to say something before I lose the chance." Her pulse quickened. "When I first met you," he began, "I was pretending to be someone I was not. I thought money made me powerful, and hiding made me safe. But you showed me something different. You showed me that integrity and compassion are stronger than any title or wealth. You reminded me what it means to live with purpose." Her eyes glistened. "Ethan," he stepped closer, "when I think about leaving, it is not the foundation I worry about, it is leaving you. Because every good thing I have done since that night in the cafe started with you." Silence filled the space between them, soft and trembling. She looked at him, her voice unsteady but sincere. "You are not the same man who walked into that cafe, Ethan, and maybe that is the best proof that what we went through was worth it." He smiled faintly, though there was sadness in his eyes. "So you think I should go?" "I think you should do what feels right," she said quietly. But promise me one thing. Anything. Wherever you go, do not lose this version of yourself. The one who believes that kindness is not weakness. He nodded slowly. I will not. Because you made sure of it. Oh. The next morning, the news spread that Ethan had accepted the position abroad. The foundation celebrated him with a farewell gathering, filled with laughter, memories, and genuine gratitude. When it was over, Emily walked him to the door. The street was lined with blooming cherry trees, petals drifting like snow around them. He turned to her. I will be back. She smiled through the ache in her chest. I know. As he walked away, she watched until he disappeared into the distance, his figure fading into the pink haze of petals and sunlight. For a moment, her heart felt heavy, but underneath that weight was something steady, something bright, because she knew this was not goodbye. It was just another beginning, another bridge waiting to be built somewhere else in the world. And somewhere deep inside, she believed that fate, the same fate that once made a poor man forget his wallet, would find a way to bring him back again. Spring turned to summer, and the city thrived under a golden haze. The bridge program had become a cornerstone of the community, every room filled with the sound of life moving forward. Children laughed in the daycare corner, while adults attended workshops in the main hall. It had been nearly 1 year since Ethan left for his new position overseas. And though his absence left a quiet space, the world he helped build continued to grow. Emily had learned to carry both the joy of progress and the ache of missing him. Every day, she poured herself into her work, training new coordinators, meeting local leaders, and visiting the new centers that had opened across nearby towns. Each success reminded her that what they had built was bigger than either of them. It was a living reminder that compassion could outlast chaos. One morning, she unlocked the cafe early before heading to the foundation. The smell of freshly brewed coffee filled the air. It was the same cafe where their story had begun, the same doorbell chime, the same golden light on the worn wooden floors. She smiled as she arranged pastries in the glass case. Ruth walked in not long after, brushing hair from her face. You still open this place every Friday? She asked. Emily laughed softly. Some things are worth keeping. This cafe reminds me where everything started. Ruth poured herself a coffee and leaned against the counter. Any news from him? Emily shook her head. He writes sometimes, short updates about his work overseas. He is helping open a new community center in Nairobi. The emails always end with one line, keep the light on. Ruth smiled. That sounds like him. Emily nodded. It does. Later that afternoon, she returned to the foundation for a board meeting. The main hall buzzed with energy. Banners of the bridge program hung proudly on the walls, each one carrying stories of transformation. As the meeting ended, one of the volunteers approached her with a stack of envelopes. These came for you, Miss Emily, he said. She thanked him, sorting through them absently until one caught her eye. It was a plain white envelope, no return address, but the handwriting was unmistakable. Her heart skipped. She opened it slowly. Emily, by the time you read this, the new center here will be complete. Every time I walk through its doors, I think about the cafe, about how something as small as $10 could ripple this far. The people here call it the Open Hands House. They do not know the full story, but they live it every day. You would be proud. I will be coming home soon, not as the man who left, but as the one you helped shape. I do not know what the future holds, but I hope to find you still building bridges, still reminding people that kindness never goes out of style. With gratitude and something more than that, Ethan. She read the letter twice, her eyes blurring with tears that came not from sadness, but from a deep, quiet joy. For the first time in months, she allowed herself to hope without hesitation. Weeks passed, and summer deepened. The foundation organized its annual community celebration, a day where families gathered, food trucks lined the park, and the city came alive with laughter and music. Emily stood on the small outdoor stage, addressing the crowd. When we started the bridge program, she said, her voice strong yet gentle, we wanted to remind people that no one is ever too lost to be found. Every one of you here is proof that kindness can rebuild anything. Oh, the applause was warm and full. As she stepped down, the sound of a familiar voice stopped her in her tracks. You always did know how to make people believe again. She turned, her breath catching. He was there, Ethan, standing at the edge of the crowd, the sunlight catching the edges of his smile. He looked different, more grounded, his eyes softer, his presence steadier. For a moment, the world around them blurred. "You came back," she whispered. "I told you I would," he said. "You kept the light on." Tears filled her eyes as she walked toward him. They met halfway, and for a heartbeat, neither spoke. Everything that had been broken, everything that had been healed, it all lived in that single quiet moment. "I saw what you built," he said. "You changed more lives than you can count." She smiled through her tears. "We built it, Ethan. Together." He took a step closer, his voice low. "I came back because I realized something. Kindness is not just about helping strangers, it is about choosing to care, even when it is hard, even when it costs something." Emily nodded. "It always costs something, but it is worth it." He looked at her, the corners of his mouth lifting. "It is, especially when it leads you home." The music from the stage swelled again, blending with the laughter of children and the sound of summer wind through the trees. They stood there for a long moment, surrounded by the very thing they had spent years trying to build, hope made visible. As the sun dipped behind the skyline, Emily looked at him and said softly, "Do you remember what you told me the night we met?" He smiled. "Every kindness counts." She took his hand, holding it tightly. "It still does." Together, they turned toward the park filled with people, toward a future that no longer needed to be hidden or disguised. The story that began with a simple mistake had become something far greater, a testament to redemption, honesty, and love that grew not from perfection, but from the courage to begin again. And as the last light of day touched their faces, the world around them felt exactly as it should, whole, alive, and full of promise.